The topic today is how can we solve the world's problems differently? Now, I want to be clear. In the next 45 minutes, I'm actually not going to solve all the world's problems, okay? There's a fine line between vision and hallucination that I try and manage. But I'm going to pose a question to you. Is it possible that networks could be the key to global cooperation, governance, and problem solving, as opposed to state-based institutions? Now, if you look around the world today, we got lots of problems. You look at this list, I'm sure you'll see things that touch you very much. Hunger, poverty, climate change, conflict, water, the environment, sexual violence, the global economy, and this mess that we're in, financial regulation, dozens and dozens of problems. If you inventory these, many of them are not getting better, and a whole bunch of them are problems that are actually getting worse. How can this be? Are these problems just too hard to solve? Well, maybe our model is wrong. What is our model? Well, based on the existing model, lots of people have come to the conclusion that basically the world is becoming ungovernable. Our model came out of Bretton Woods. And right after the Second World War, 42 nations got together in this New Hampshire town of Bretton Woods, and they attempted to redefine the way that the world would operate, with the key goal of preventing a world war from ever happening again. But they also did a bunch of other things. They created the World Bank and what became the International Monetary Fund, and a year later they created the UN. And a year later, UNESCO, and we had the International Standards Organization, and soon the WTO, and then the G8 and the G20, a whole number of institutions that are based on nation states. Well, the trouble is that these institutions don't seem to be making a lot of progress, to the point that some people, a friend of mine, Nicholas Negroponte, says we should just disband the UN. Now, personally, I don't think that that's the solution. And nation states will be around for the foreseeable future. And nation states are important in this picture because they have certain powers, like a monopoly over force or the right to tax, that are kind of important in orchestrating and marshaling resources to solve problems in the world. But increasingly, nation states, while necessary, and global institutions, while necessary, are becoming insufficient. Now, bear with me a second here. We're going to step back a few hundred years and put all of this in context. All around the world, hundreds of years ago, we had an agrarian economy, and the means of production and political system was called feudalism, and knowledge was tightly concentrated in tiny oligopolies. And the institution of the state was pretty much city-states. And people didn't have knowledge. There was no concept of progress. For example, you were born, you lived your life, you worked as a serf in this feudal farm, and then you died. Well, along comes Johannes Gutenberg with his great invention. And over time, different parts of the society began to acquire knowledge, and when they did, the institutions of feudal agrarian society and the city-state began to appear to be stalled or frozen or in atrophy or even failing. It didn't make sense, for example, for the church to be responsible for science or for medicine when people had knowledge. So over time, we saw the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of the nation-state. And this led to the rise of all kinds of institutions. We had national economies, we put boundaries around them, we had institutions of governance and typically a currency and the rule of law and foreign policy and internal policy, nation states for national economies. And it was a good thing. I mean, eventually it led to the Industrial Revolution, the creation of a corporation, science, university, and the standard of living of people around the world advanced. But increasingly, we live in a truly global economy, or globalizing economy. And once again, the technology genie is out of the bottle. Only this time, it's very different. See, the internet gave us, the printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet enables each of us to be a producer, a publisher, a broadcaster. The printing press gave us access to the written word. The internet gives us access to the words and the knowledge and the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a global basis. This is not an information age that we're entering into. It's an age of networked intelligence. And arguably, the nation state is becoming the wrong size to solve global problems. In fact, if you look around, there's a case to be made. This is from my most recent book, my most recent book made of atoms, called Macroeconomics, that there are a whole set of institutions today that are at various stages of being stalled or frozen or in atrophy or failing. The industrial age has finally come to its logical conclusion. You know, the corporation, typified by General Motors, America's greatest company, it went bankrupt. The financial system. One of the tougher talks I've given in the last while was called TEDx Wall Street. It was the New York Stock Exchange, where I stood up and I said, Wall Street, we have a problem. There's this growing understanding that the world is becoming less fair, less stable, less just, less sustainable, and you're at the heart of the problem. Your core modus operandi almost brought down the global capitalist system. Have you changed? Media. I mean, the newspaper, I don't know, it'll be like 20 years, 25 years from now, the last newspaper will be published in an OECD country. So one youngster said to us, if the news is important, it will find me. Now, of course, there are all kinds of tough issues here. How do we stay informed in an age where our traditional ways of doing that are collapsing? How do we pay journalists? How do we get investigative reporting? How do we prevent ourselves from being in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers where we only follow our own point of view? And the purpose of information is not to inform us, but perhaps is to give us comfort. Well, it turns out that all of these institutions are based on the industrial model, where something at the top pushed out standardized products, services, newspapers, lectures, television shows, you name it, standardized units to passive recipients. And so it's been with governance and with global governance. We're the citizens of the world, but we're passive recipients of these institutions that are governing, allegedly, on our behalf. So let's look at this issue. What's the new model? I don't know. Let's take something like climate change. Big problem. Bill Clinton was saying to us last year at Davos, if we reduce carbon emissions by 80% in the year 2050, it'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down, and in the meantime, some bad things will happen. You can expect 1.5 billion people to lose half their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years. Big problem. It's too late to do certain things. So we have to solve this. So our institutions mobilize. And they all go off to Cancun, they go off to Copenhagen, and they go off to some other place, you know, to Rio and so on. They can't get a deal around 80%. They can't get a deal around 6%. Meanwhile, there are, I think, probably about 20 million people that are just self-organizing around this issue. And they're not Malcolm Gladwell's slacktivists. You know, just because you go like on Facebook doesn't mean that you're changing the world. And fair enough point. They're people really doing things. They're architects on the internet trying to figure out how to retrofit old buildings, and kids in their schoolyards working to reduce carbon in their communities. You know, policy people working on new tax credit ideas and so on. This is the first time in human history where the world is starting to be mobilized, and we're kind of all on the same side. We've been mobilized before around world wars, but we were on very different sides. So, I don't know, this is a big issue. The killer app for the internet may end up being saving the planet, literally.